All right, let's move on to our sixth topic, which is non-solicit and non-compete clauses. I put up a pair of handcuffs because this is an area where you can get into some pretty serious trouble. So typically let's start with non-competes. Typically in professional services deals, often, maybe not typically, one party is worried that the customer is worried that the vendor is going to finish this deal, learn all kinds of valuable things about the customer's business, and then run off and serve the customer's competitors. And so a non-compete will generally say you won't do that. After this deal, you're not going to go provide the services to our competitors. My main lesson to you about this is you're really taking a risk even by doing it, because these kinds of arrangements get into antitrust law. Antitrust law does not like people agreeing that they're not going to compete with each other. In fact, if you specifically agree, say you're both tech companies, customer and provider, we're not going to compete with each other, you're just playing with dynamite, and that's very unlikely to fly. And I did the handcuffs because this goes beyond your clause not being enforceable. You could be in legal trouble. This more limited non-compete that I'm talking about can be okay. I still prefer, anytime I do a non-compete, if I can get an antitrust and unfair competition lawyer to talk to me about it, I would like that. I'm always going to go for that. But if you very much limit your non-compete, you greatly reduce your chances of getting into trouble. Say you define who the competitors are and you give a limited list of them. You say this non-compete only applies to the staff who worked on our project. It only lasts for a very limited period after the relationship ends, like 6 months or a year. In other words, the more you limit the breadth of that promise, the more chances are that it's enforceable and that you won't get in trouble. My question to you, though, is, are you sure you even need a non-compete? Why not just an NDA? If the customer's concerned about the vendor learning from it and then going and serving its competitors, how about you put all the stuff or much of the stuff under non-disclosure agreement? That doesn't raise these antitrust concerns. It's not as easy to enforce as a non-compete because it's harder to know if an NDA has been breached, but it's going to get you in a lot less trouble. And of course, if your non-compete is unenforceable because it violates unfair competition or antitrust law, the fact that it's easier to detect the violation does you no good. So be very careful with non-competes. Employee non-solicits raise the same issues. This is usually the vendor who wants this. This is where the vendor says, we're going to assign our staff to you, and you promise not to poach them. You promise not to hire our staff away from us. Again, this is something where you're kind of playing with fire. There are antitrust concerns, unfair competition concerns. There's also, in many states, employment law concerns. Employees are protected from deals, particularly among competitors, where customer and vendor are actually competitors. They're both tech companies, for instance, where you're really asking for it, where that is very likely unenforceable and can actually get you into serious trouble, even putting that down in a contract, even agreeing informally to do something like that can get you into trouble. Again, in very limited circumstances, this can be enforceable, where you say, you won't, we're not competitors. It's brick and mortar customer and tech vendor, and the vendor's just concerned is it's going to steal its consultants. The customer's going to steal the consultants to work on the customer's, IT team. You say, during the project and for a limited period after, you won't directly solicit our people. You limit it ideally to the people who are actually involved in the project, not all of our company. You always want to have a cautionary limit that you've probably seen if you've seen these clauses, which says that a general solicitation to the public doesn't violate the clause, even if the vendor's staff ends up applying. In other words, if the customer posts, we're looking for a new IT manager, and doesn't directly approach the vendor's staff with one of those opportunities, and yet the vendor staff applies, that's not a violation. So that's the context in which that can work. Again, if I'm doing one of these, I really feel more comfortable if I could check in with ideally an employment lawyer and an antitrust lawyer, just to make sure whatever state law is applicable, as well as federal law or maybe other countries' laws, I'm not going to get myself in trouble. So handle these clauses with great care. Be aware of the problems they create.
If you found this video useful, please come check out Tech Contracts Academy. We provide training on drafting and negotiating contracts about artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and other forms of software. It's all for lawyers, contract managers, and any business people involved with contracts. So please come check out our programs live and on demand at techcontracts.com.